So we've got to the questions and answers section of the presentations. So first question, Josephine, this is probably one mostly to you. How do you go with your senior managers and I guess other non-SCAF experts, knowing what they're looking at when they're looking at a scaffold and undertaking a site inspection?
Importantly for us, it's training. First and foremost, making sure that everybody has the right level of training. We do a lot of in-house training at ProBuild, so we have some online videos created by our HSC departments that people will go through with regards to not only scaffolding but other temporary structures, and then having the right guidance templates in place for those inspections, so they're not only documented, they've got a guide to go off of what they're looking at. In addition to that, we have guidance notes we produce ourselves outside of information that you get from SafeWorks or from a regulatory office or a standard. We take that important information, we summarise it into a user-friendly guide for our staff, and then we make sure everybody's trained in that. Then it's about going out on site with the right people, going out with a facade foreman, looking at what's happening, having a look at the activities, recording that down in our task observations. And we use a program called Procore for that.
Well, can I bring you in on that one as well? What else do you see that works well across industry with respect to that particular issue?
I think it's timely inspections is the key issue that I often see, that companies are waiting till scaffolding is fully erected before they go and do an inspection. So they have access to the design drawing and they probably need to be considering doing inspections earlier in the process. So when they're first identifying that there's, or using the inspections to identify, are we even setting out in accordance with the original design drawings and picking that up early? So looking at all construction management people favour reading design drawings, and it's something getting those drawings and making them available to the management team and just using basic techniques and skills to see at the beginning when they're laying out scaffold, is it to the design drawings, or raising that early is a key consideration I think should be brought into it.
And Luke, is there anything you want to add on that one?
From our point of view, one of the key initiatives that we see, and one of the real critical ones, is beyond the inspection process, and that's why we sort of identified the need to have an engineered control over it. It takes pressure off the inspection process and pressure off the management team to have to be readily monitoring scaffold ties and the integrity of the scaffold once it's erected. So very important to follow the engineer's design, have the design appropriate beforehand. And once that's done and there's an anti-tamper system implemented, it really sort of takes the pressure off that inspection process. Not that the inspection process isn't needed, but gives a lot more surety around that process, and it provides a suitable engineered control, which I think is another key measure once the scaffold is actually up to maintain that structural integrity.
Can I follow that up with a related question, and that's around the verification of competency? So I guess the panel as a whole, but Josephine, we might start with you. How do you go at ProBuild in relation to ensuring verification of competency for those people that are undertaking inspections of scaffold, and what is it precisely that you guys are looking for?
So for us, when it comes to scaffolding, it is an important part of our induction process, and this really applies to any licensing and any licensing that we have, trades that have a license requirement on site. ProBuild standard is a minimum VOC within the last 3 years, and that VOC must be issued by a registered training organisation. So for us, it's about not only to have a current license, but someone within the last 3 years has verified from a registered training organisation that that person is competent at that task. And I guess this stems back from high-risk work licences and the ability to add qualifications to them without necessarily being verified that you're competent at a task. So you can add in a qualification that adds another 5 years to the licence, and that can then come to site and you assume someone is competent, but they actually haven't done a task in the last 7 years. So for us, it's prove to me that you have a qualification or verification of your competency in that task from the last 3 years, and that's our minimum standard. So that's, as I said, for all high work licenses.
Yeah, great. Ralph, did you want to add something on that?
No, look, that's a very good standard that ProBuild have set there. I think some of the areas that I see on site is sometimes that less than 4 metres, and the fact that it may not be a license required, but there still needs to be competency and training. And a lot of companies are moving to, if you're erect scaffolding, you must have a minimum scaffolding license, even if it's less than 4 metres. But if you're not going to that kind of standard, it's then working out, well, what is the competency you require to erect scaffolding under 4 metres? And it shouldn't be just anyone can do it. there needs to be some competency and training there. So as an auditor, FSOs would look for what have you established as being the minimum competency and how do you enforce that on the project.
And Luke, what other sorts of things do you see across industry when you're out there with respect to verification of competencies?
We see a really varied approach and a really varied standard in terms of verification of competency. I think ProBuild and what Josephine outlined gives a really good benchmark from what should be expected across the industry. Unfortunately, across the different tiers of construction projects, we see quite a varied approach, and with some of them being quite relaxed with minimal regard to verification of competency in some areas. One thing that we've identified is the need for education across various construction managers and builders, particularly in the smaller tiers that aren't as sophisticated as ProBuild or some of those sort of tier 1 and large tier 2 companies might be, which is probably the biggest concern from our side. Is sometimes a disregard for that, but I think a benchmark similar to what Josephine outlined is critical, and educating the industry on a minimum standard is pretty critical.
Just while I've got you, Luke, there's been a couple of questions come through in relation to, I guess, what does a product like ScafShield cost? And in addition to that, when would companies be best placed to come and approach you if they were looking at using your product on their construction sites?
So the cost we typically price, it's a hired system that we provide a project price in the early stages or prior to the builder or scaffold tender being awarded. The approximate cost for it starts at around 4 cents a day per ScafShield unit. Put it into perspective on a project that might be worth $20 or $25 million, it could be $5,000 cost or less to the entire project. Typically the way that ScafShield is procured or arranged on a project is it is priced up quite early on in the piece before a scaffolder has been engaged. Will typically supply the ScafShield units to the builder and scaffolder along with the keys prior to the erection of scaffold. The earlier the better. We like to get the product on site and onto the project once that sort of first jump of scaffolds completed, and then it allows the builder and the scaffolder to retain the stock and then manage the installation process as they go. We also, particularly because it's a relatively new product, we find ourselves being installed on existing projects, so it's something that can be retrofitted. If the scaffold's already erected, installation can be easily completed on all accessible areas of the scaffold. The earlier the better. Before the scaffold going up is the easiest time to get it installed. As the scaffolders are installing it, they can install the ScafShield as they go, but also if it's a high risk scaffold, predominantly one that the builder might be having issues with maintaining the integrity of it can be installed at any time and probably never too late. We recently installed it on a project where the scaffold is being dropped and the builder wasn't comfortable with unauthorised movements, and so we installed it. It will only be for a matter of weeks, but it was a good initiative from their part.
Ralph, one for you. You've been asked about what the most common sorts of examples of breaches with respect to H1.1 might be with respect to scaffolding.
Falls from height. It's usually that there's no clear instructions to scaffolders in regards to how to erect the scaffold and what techniques they're using to prevent falls from heights during the erection process or falling objects during that process. What is the exclusion zone they're putting in place? How are they implementing that exclusion zone? How have we made that work given the timing of the erection and when it's occurring with other trades and other activities that are happening on site? So that under-over policy in regards to controlling falling objects as well as falls from height. So there is situations where we come across no direction given to the scaffolders about what is the controls to be put in place during the erection and what's been agreed prior to starting that process on site.
Josephine and Luke, from a practical perspective, does that resonate with you guys, or do you see additional risks when you're out on site?
No, that resonates very much with us and how we go about managing that erection process. For us, we have operational safety zones. That's what we put in place. It's about how you maintain those and how you document it, how you communicate it, and how you control it. That's really the key part, and it's about getting everybody on the same page early on in the project so that we can do that effectively.
Completely agree with Josephine on that part. It's about sort of early collaboration on each project, identifying those risks.
All right, guys, we're just about out of time, but I'll do one last question to the panel before we wrap up. And I guess what I was hoping to get from each of you was your top tip in relation to scaffolding and what can we take away from this presentation in relation to how you would suggest to other companies within industry to focus their efforts to improve safety outcomes with respect to scaffolding? Ralph, it's a big one, but I'll chuck to you first if you like.
I suppose that early engagement with scaffolding companies. So setting the standard early, review of pricing and looking at what are the risks they're bringing, what do we know about the scaffold company, how are we going to manage them early on, agreeing about what standards of documentation will be provided in regards to the design, who is it that's doing the design, and then holding people accountable to meeting that, or where we need to do changes, re-engaging the engineer to provide update drawings. But that initial, spending some time initially in the consultation and the process early in the piece, and definitely not just letting it as another contract and moving forward, but doing early inspections, setting the standard early with the scaffold company, opening up lines of communication early would be my best tip. Obviously, there's a lot of things that's being discussed, but that would be one I would be keen for companies to consider.
For me, one thing I would encourage people to do is be collaborative. Get everybody on site or in the room together. If you're going to look at a new product or an innovation, or you're going to try and find innovation, then you need to get everybody together, the specialists, the workers, the guys installing. That's so important, because from those conversations, it just leads to better outcomes for the site, the safety of the scaffold, and then ultimately the industry. So for me, it's collaboration and not being frightened to bring people that don't necessarily agree into a room to talk it out and find solutions.
From my perspective, probably an obvious one, beyond the processes and procedures and the administrative efforts that a lot of builders put in place, is just the awareness that there are engineered controls out there to prevent the removal of ties and tampering of scaffold. It doesn't have to be an onerous process to monitor it, and there are effective measures in place. I think it's important for people to get a good understanding that there are easy, effective alternative engineered controls in place that will assist the already robust administrative processes that a lot of builders have in place, and greatly assist the builders that don't have it in place. So I think that's a big key one for us.
Josephine, Luke, Ralph, thank you kindly for your wisdom and insight. I hope everybody has found the presentation really useful. There's a lot of comments coming through about how fantastic and excellent it was. So thank you all. We will be doing follow-up presentations in relation to other topics in the near future. So keep an eye out on our website, www.fsc.gov.au, for future dates and subjects. Thank you everybody for your time, and look forward to chatting to you at a future date.